Good afternoon. Welcome to another week of We the People. We're fortunate to have a very special guest here today, our newly appointed police chief, James Rovella. He's the normal looking guy with the tie, not the rest of us. But of course, the usual three stooges, Hyacinth and Jerry. Jerry with a bandaged up arm.
Yeah, I think somebody hit him.
So we're going to be taking phone calls almost right away, but before we do that, anything you have for community coming up?
Community now. Community, I have the Maple Avenue NRZ group meeting coming up in another 2 weeks or so. I'm hoping to have the chief there at that meeting so people can, come and congratulate him and meet him a little more, and
Bring their gifts for him.
And bring gifts and everything that they want to bring. Yeah, it's another couple of weeks, but I want to make sure people know about it and come out to support their working effort in the neighborhood to make it a better place. Senior Center at 830 Maple Avenue. I hope our seniors can go and continue to enjoy the good programs there. And that's right now. That's about it. I mean, we talk about community day. That was
we talked about your community day. That was a great turnout.
Yeah.
And I was talking to your lieutenant over the weekend, and not just because the chief is sitting here, but he was telling me how gratified he was with the issue with the bicycles that were raffled off.
I know.
And one of the kids came up and said it was the first bike they ever had.
Yeah.
And I guess another one had some physical issues, physical disabilities or whatever, and was now able to ride a bike. So Lieutenant Allen is the one that arranged, I think part of it was from the Elks Club. They made a donation toward the bikes. But that was just a great thing to see. And to hear a kid say, this is the first bike I've had, it just shows how you build those relationships, and that kid is going to remember that for the rest of his life.
Exactly.
So,
and that's why I think each neighborhood should try to do something like that. You don't have to wait for a special event. Just have a party.
Well, we need a lot more of that as a city. But
involve your police union, your fires, department, Red Cross, whoever, people who are in the neighborhood. Get them involved in what goes on.
Well, instead of letting everybody hear us, let's jump right into the chief. Chief, it was a long process, but you're finally here. You're Hartford's next permanent police chief. Hopefully you're going to be around for a few years, because that's always been one of the issues, the turnover. You've already been here 19 years as a police officer for the Hartford Police, and then your stint with the state's attorney's office, and now you're back here as our chief. But we first met pretty much, I think, Easter weekend. And that's when I had the opportunity to go through the shooting task force, and you gave me a tour of the operations up there. And I've said this, people are going to get sick of hearing me say it all the time, but the one thing that impressed me that weekend was your vision. It's like, you've got to be well rested when anybody talks to you, because you're already 6 months ahead solving problems as people tell you what the issues are. And I've had the luxury of having a lot of good conversations with you about your vision, where you want to go. One of the things, and Reverend Brown is here in the booth, he just came in. One of the issues that you talk about quite a bit is, and you refer to it as the moral compass of our youth. And I think anybody that watches what goes on in the city, and not just in the city, but across the nation, realizes there's a problem with our youth as far as respect for the law, respect for life, respect for each other as neighbors and individuals. And there are some good programs that are keeping those moral compasses in line. And that's the one thing I'm referring to is the Waterbury PAL program, which I know is something we've talked about, that you want to model Hartford's programs somewhat of that. How do you perceive that moral compass? How do we get to that point, and how do you actually start changing it?
Well, Kevin, you have a lot in that question, and let me more of an overview to explain. Let's approach this violent crime in general. I see violent crime as somewhat of a mathematical equation for us also, which is totally different than what a lot of people see it as. In Hartford, and Jerry, you can help me out here, you have 125,000 people, and we probably have 125 bad eggs that are responsible for 75% of our violent crime. That proposes a very interesting mathematical question to me. how can I reduce that 125 substantially? And how do I get that done? Well, I can get that done by the shooting team. I can get that done by patrol officers and normal law enforcement techniques and programs. And I start to say to myself, well, I can probably take 50 off the board. So now I have 75, so you can see a reduction in my violent crime. From there, how do I do it? Because sustainability has always been a problem for law enforcement. How do we keep these programs continually reducing crime? So we move on to other avenues, and some of those other avenues are where I'm going to answer your question is one of those, how do we grow our children? And as soon as we can begin to have more influence on our children, either through PAL programs, because the majority of our PAL kids come from single parents, the most vulnerable or susceptible group out there. And that will tend to lead me into the moral compass. And I've talked to Reverend Brown, especially in these faith-based organizations. If I can start with PAL, they can maybe be able to take 10 to 20 more kids off that mathematical equation. The faith-based groups can begin to take 5 or 10 or how many more they think they can handle with that moral compass and guide them and take them off the table for me. And we have some other things that are cooking also with some state grants that may show us some different ways to look at crimes and to deal with it. So it's more of a mathematical equation, but kids must realize that moral compass. And what that may mean to these kids are just me placing a thought in their head. The thought in the head is maybe I shouldn't do this, maybe I should hesitate, maybe I should just think about it a minute, and maybe I change my mind. We learned about that type of thinking with the shooting task force. When I asked the shooting task force, well, I want to insert decision-making steps into the mind of a would-be shooter. And what I mean by that is you had a would-be shooter that his only decision was tuck the gun in my pants and I'm moving down, or I'm going someplace and I have an altercation and I'm taking out my gun and shooting. Well, we started with the traffic division and we know their telephone trees are vast. So we put traffic division out there. So now I told the would-be shooter, first decision point, maybe I should leave my gun home, but I can come and get it if I need it. Okay, I have my altercation. Now I have to get back and get it. After I get it, now I'm exposed to law enforcement. They may have traffic out there, or they may have patrol units, or it's quieter. And another decision-making concept is when they get back, the party may not be there. So I'm trying to insert decision-making steps into the mind of a would-be shooter, including the shooting team going out and saying to these guys, listen, once you bring your gun out, you will bring the attention of the entire police force. So I hope I got to some of your questions.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's, and I know you're familiar with my blog, but last week I had a video from South Marshall Street, and it was people just acting out of control. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what you said is that you attract the attention of law enforcement. So subsequent to that video, and you can't sit back and do nothing, you have to say, okay, we just can't ignore this. I think the following Monday night, there was like 6 arrests, and then 10 or 12 the night after that for loitering. And I know the dog warden or the animal control officer was up there looking for pit bulls where they properly registered, vaccinated, everything else. So there's a whole slew of things that come into play where you show that, you know, we're not going to ignore this behavior.
Yeah, but Kevin, I want to ask a question. You talk about, yeah, then there was a lot of arrests. Is it always necessary to arrest, or is it important to have somebody of authority to talk with these young people about their action and give them that ability to say, yeah, you know, I was wrong, and have that officer figure out how you can work your resolve out without having to get so violent about things. Maybe sometimes if we do a little more talking, communication, learning how to partner with our maybe most vulnerable, we can maybe do things without having to arrest somebody.
I think you're going to get an interesting answer to that.
Yeah, I need to get an answer because, again, when we arrest these young kids and so,
let me throw in my comment here.
They're labeled for life, and we need to figure another way out, unless it's.
But Hyacinth, I think it's up on the officer to make that decision, and that decision should be made based upon the violence of the crime or the seriousness of the crime, and also a liability factor. what if you let this guy go and he turns around and shoots someone down the street on the next day when he should have been?
We're not talking about shooting, Jerry. We're talking about something
Well,
else.
I think even, and I know this has turned a couple heads when I've been at community meetings and I listen to your philosophy on the street level drug dealing. But it makes extreme sense where you don't need to arrest for every little crime. If you've got somebody that's on probation, you may be able to open a door with them by saying, okay, we're going to tag that marijuana and put it into evidence. This is your one get out of jail free card, but now we want to work with you down the road. And the other side of that is every arrest ties officers up potentially for hours. Like last night at the start of the midnight shift, they had 8 officers tied up at the hospitals. Now that's half the midnight shift. They probably have about 20 cars on midnights. Half of them are sitting in the hospital rooms with people they've arrested. That's a huge waste of resources, especially if it's a little larceny charge or drug possession or something like that. But Chief, why don't I'll let you answer it much more better than, or more eloquently than I can.
That South Marshall video, there were already 2 warrants in the process of being approved, and there was a 3rd trying to be identified. Other units went through that area. And that is part of the broken windows kind of theory. You have 2 theories of crime. You have violent crime way on the right spectrum, and you have the broken windows. The broken windows more addresses the community and what the community lives with on a day-to-day basis. And those are very community-oriented policing projects that they do. But that neighborhood, we were up there probably about 3 months ago with the traffic detail, and I was just watching what was going on. And several of the citizens said we needed to be up there more, and they started to come up there a little more, and they liked seeing us around, and they started to point out different things. South Marshall was definitely on the radar for us. That's an area where you're getting a vast majority of brand new homes through Habitat for Humanity and the Aetna. And it's an area that doesn't need these thugs running around the neighborhood.
Great potential.
It really does. And the entire city has great potential. So education is one way, but we have to have presence in the other way, where they have to understand that our presence is going to be there.
Yes.
Well, and there's also, there's a lot of good people in our neighborhoods, because after the South Marshall Street video, I got an email from someone. It was actually in her real name. It wasn't an anonymous or fictitious thing. And she said, I appreciate you putting this out there to show what's going on. If you can help me clean up our neighborhood, I'll be your new best friend. And then she gave me a lot of information, which was passed on to the CSO, or the walk beat for that, or the bike officer for that area. So there's a lot of people out there that don't want to live like this, and they want to build those relationships with the police and the community to clean their neighborhoods up. And it's like you said, it's that handful, the 125, that just make it bad for everyone else. But
as the chief said, it's about the present and how many people you have to be out there, showing that they're out there. Because on weekends, especially in our neighborhood, I can walk for hours and don't see one soul of an officer. And I said to myself, if we can just see somebody drive around, slow down, whatever, it's just a present. Make people know that they're around.
Hyacinth, this goes back to supervision. A good supervisor, a good sergeant, a lieutenant will make sure that his men are canvassing the area. First of all,
men and women, Jerry.
Lieutenant,
we have women in police work now too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But supervisors also should have some knowledge of what's going on in the neighborhood that they're overseeing.
Well, presence is important, but let's talk. Let's talk about how the chief first got here. And this is something we hear an awful lot about, but we really don't see it all that much, is the shooting task force. That has such a huge impact on our city over the last year.
It does.
And I would, I've been able to get to tour and see it. It's like something out of TV, the way they plot it and chart it and the intelligence information that's used in identifying people and really connecting all the dots or the pieces of the puzzle. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that came about and your philosophy on that, because it's had such a huge impact on our city?
That's just a super
Yeah, there was a lot to do with that, Kevin. The first part was the partnering with all the different agencies that are employed there. Not only the local police departments, so we had East Hartford, Manchester, and West Hartford. Look at all the state components we brought to bear on it too. We brought the Chief State's Attorney's Office. We brought inspectors from the Hartford office, prosecutors from the Hartford office and Chief State's Attorney's Office. We brought the Connecticut State Police, Department of Correction, probation, parole. So we started to bring in all these different aspects of law enforcement. We brought in a ton of Hartford police officers, both very experienced detectives. We brought in some major crime people, and we also brought in some very hotshot kind of, I want to go, go, go officers, because we realized that the mix of experience and go, go, go would go a long way for us, and it has. But it was our first endeavor to realize that once every component works together, it works much better for the citizens of Hartford.
Yes.
Right.
So we decided.
When you hear the applause, that means Trish likes what you're saying.
Oh, okay. I thought the Reverend Brown was back there.
Oh, he's clapping too. He's making the sign of the cross over you. He's blessing you. But Trish claps her hands.
So we found this was our first endeavor to say that collaboratively, this endeavor works. And you're going to see this more and more with our police department and our local police departments around us. And it's not that regionalization moniker that goes on people, everybody tightens up. It's more of that we realize that our city survives and can thrive with these collaborations. When I talk about the economic point of view in crime, people kind of look at me a little funny, especially my police officers. But in order for everyone to survive, and that's one of our pillars, is that we're all in this together. Economically, for the city to survive, for the state to survive and flourish, we have to reduce this violent crime. But I also realize on the other end of the spectrum, my communities need the presence, and we're working in different ways to get that done.
Well, I think one of the things that, and Hyacinth, you know this, Jerry, you know this, you can't argue with the fact that there's still that wall between the community and the police. A lot of it's mistrust, a lot of it's past practices, things that have happened. But I just want, a little story. That Easter weekend when I actually went out riding afterwards with your lieutenant from the shooting task force. Another, I think you've met Lieutenant Smith, another top-notch guy. The city's very fortunate to have somebody like him. But we went out riding, and there was a traffic stop that the shooting task force made on Barber Street. And it was somebody that's on PSN, which is Project Safer Neighborhoods, where correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's that 125 you're talking about that are potentially targeted as being the people to keep an eye on. But this guy was on the PSN list. They pulled him over, and we showed up there at the traffic stop, and it was, could you step out of the car, sir? Could you do this, sir? And even the people that were coming down off their porches, there was a little banter back and forth, very polite. And I'm like, I asked the lieutenant, I says, what's up with this? Usually you'd expect somebody being shoved around, MF is, the rotten language and everything else. He said, that's Chief Ravella's way. He says, if you're going to be on the task force, you're going to treat people with respect, because if you treat them with respect today, you may be dealing with them for something else where they can help you out tomorrow. And I said, that sets the tone of the whole thing. Yeah. We have some terrible people out there, some nasty people, but they're still human beings and should be treated with respect. And I think that's important that you set that tone, all the way down through the ranks, that everybody should be respected.
In one of our first operational documents, we produced that, and I pretty much told them they had to be respectful to everybody, and that would be the first thing that got them bounced out of the union and sent home. But realistically, they have to approach everybody with that opinion and treat everybody that way. It could go south and get bad in a moment's time, but they have to all start that way. Yes, we have some very bad people. We have some predators out there, and we have some psychopaths or these people out there that we have to deal with on a regular basis, but they're just not representative of the community at large out there. They're just not. This is a small minority of individuals. We're seeing men and women that are causing 75% of our mayhem, and they are a target group. They just are. If they want to cease to be a target group, they can stop engaging.
Behave. Well, do you? Go ahead.
As residents, we really appreciate the changes that we've seen come around you know, a community, or in special, the city in general. Because so many times you've gone out of the city and people said, no, you live, no, I live in Hartford. And you know what, I've never felt.
What, are you crazy?
You know, and oh yeah, is it safe? Is it safe? But because we really definitely need to change the way people think about the city of Hartford, you came in, and I always tell people, you are the savior. I mean, to be honest with you, because no, you know, you brought in that talent of partnership that, you know, most people take notice of. That things is really different in the city of Hartford. The fact that we are no longer just going to sit around and let these people come in and just shoot up their whole town, and we continue to have the suburban looking at us as, oh yeah, that's a shoot up town, you don't go there for nothing. You know, we need to change that kind of a mentality of what people are thinking of us. And to bring all that group of people together to make it happen, we really appreciate it. And I hope we continue and continue, because we want to be able to say Hartford is the place to be. And want people to come back and do business here.
Perception is the most difficult part of how we look at Hartford. Especially if you're from the suburbs, or you come to work in Hartford and leave, and you don't want to spend time here, and you don't want to see what actually goes on here. And Kevin, if you want to reel out your soapbox, I can get on it now. Hartford has such opportunity, both economically, financially, education-wise, just across the board. And we talk about how we realistically portray Hartford. You can look at my crime statistics and say, oh my God, what happened in Berry Square last month? We went up 2%. Well, let me tell you what, entire Berry Square didn't go up 2%. What happened is we had a couple blocks in the neighborhood that went up. That's what happened, those neighborhoods. So we're going to take another look at how we portray our city, because perception of our city is very important. You have some of the most economically developable properties in the city. There's financially great opportunities for either businesses or other groups that can put together capital to invest in the city. Great opportunity. You know, I look at some buildings in downtown that don't have the occupancy rate, and I wonder why. You have two crossroads of 2 to 3 major highways between Route 2, I-84, and 91. Parking is usually available for you downtown, and really nothing happens on there. So why isn't it filled? And I think we need to sell ourselves, or portray ourselves much better as a police department in that respect.
Well, that's, you know, it's also unusual to hear a police chief talking about economic development. So I think that's one of the things, you know, you get all the parts of the puzzle and have the vision to pull that together to make it happen. You know, I know you go to restaurants downtown, you sit outside on the patios and things like that. A lot of people are afraid of that. You know, and anytime I ask somebody to meet me at a restaurant downtown, we're going to sit outside. Well, yeah, well, that could happen anywhere. But it's, you know, it's the perception, you know, all you have to do is visit Hartford at the Jazz Fest, or take a walk through Bushnell Park when something's going on, or any of the events, the movie nights or whatever that are going on across the city, and realize there's a lot of great people here. It's not a bad city, but the police department has to play a huge role in that. But I think you know, again, we've talked about this, so I know I'm not ambushing you with this, but we've talked in the past about what a terrible job the police department has done about putting out the positive side of what they're doing. You know, we were just, at the beginning of this, I talked about Lieutenant Allen and the bikes that were donated. That should have been a current article somewhere with a picture of those kids on their bikes.
The Hartford News.
But, you know, that's just a small thing. You guys are taking so many guns off the streets, so many drugs, the good things that are happening, and that's what we need to hear more of. We need to hear more of the success stories.
A press person that can get it out there.
You need a public relations person.
Exactly.
You know, so.
That kid, I call him a kid, Lieutenant Allen, what a hard worker he is.
He is.
But he's always out there. He's so committed. And I could point you to 10 other officers that are constantly in the community, constantly getting phone calls, not billing the police department for his time. You know, the extra effort they put out. I agree.
You do have a lot of good people there.
There's a couple of areas where we do need some improvement on. We have made monumental strides in some things, you know, but the traffic enforcement is one of the things I see, from my perspective. and
Don't hit-
others, that we
watch your
need-
mic,
that
Jerry.
We need a greater enforcement. Secondly, noise. We have a problem with noise. 'Cause I call in myself to have someone respond to certain areas that
Well,
it's quite vociferous.
Let's talk about that enforcement. One of the, and not to go back to past administration, but one of the first things you did this year is put together your summer initiative of what are we going to do to keep things quiet. The quality of life team you put out there, which was comprised basically of the school resource officers who were out of school for the summer and a few other people that were shuffled around. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that. People that would call Lieutenant Rodriguez or one of the people of the quality of life team, and they actually got a response. An officer would show up. Hyacinth called me one night, and I happened to be with Lieutenant Rodriguez, and within about 10 minutes, her issue was being addressed. Those are the things that people really look for. You know, I've never heard anybody say, I'm going to move out of Hartford because of the shootings. I do hear people say, I'm going to move out of Hartford because I can't deal with the traffic violations, the loud noise, noisy neighbors. So the quality of life is very important. And I think you've started addressing that, but I also understand next week that goes away because school is restarting and those officers are going to be back in the schools.
I think there's a misconception on the part of some officers about the noise factor. I think some believe that it has to be late at night or after a certain time before we do enforcement, and that's not it, because I helped write the noise ordinance, you know, with counsel Shirley was there at the time. If the noise is such that a reasonable person would perceive that it's annoying, you can make that call. And also,
But the bottom line is he's actually got a team out there that's addressing that. And I know I've heard complaints from people that don't like the enforcement in the park, don't like, you know, this is their tradition and this is what they do in the park. Well, it's not our tradition, and smoking marijuana and gambling in a park is not something that a lot of people want to bring their kids to. So the quality of life team has been addressing things like that, and I think those little issues are the things we'd like to see keep going.
under certain streets, they definitely need traffic enforcement.
Well, let's let the chief answer about his quality of life team.
Quality of Life team was, they were very well received throughout the city, no
Rosa
doubt about it.
loves them.
Rosa on Grafton Street actually does love them. But unfortunately, they're a luxury when we start talking about manpower. We saw an opportunity to utilize the school resource officers, excuse me, and several different officers. And they weren't bent on just infractions and misdemeanors and numbers. I told them, you got to get out there, you got to interact with everybody, you got to understand what their problems are. So not only are we doing some enforcement, showing a lot of presence, I'm also doing research myself. I'm doing research with what these residents are actually looking for. Actually, Lieutenant Ford did a very nice little quick study up in the Blue Hills Avenue neighborhood that talked about what they're looking for, and it was presence. A blue uniform and a police car. They wanted presence. We also saw that in many other neighborhoods, but the most costly to the administration is this presence, because we can't keep hiring officers. We have to blend them as equally and as fairly as we can across the board. So, with that said, unfortunately, the school resource officers do go back. They made quite an impact in several of the local parks, and the parks are actually gorgeous in this city. But we realize too that the parks are well utilized by the city residents during the summertime.
But the behavior has to be acceptable.
Exactly, and some of the behavior, the drinking, they somewhat tolerated but pushed it off. They had to address vendors for illegal food sales, which is a health problem, which could be potentially very damaging to some people. But they kept the order there, and everybody should have had a good time. They even picked up a potential predator down in one of the parks one day just for being present there, rather than somebody calling in the problem or taking it into their own hands. So with that, I'm going to try to maintain some fashion of that, but it's usually just going to be a weekend detail. But Jerry, if you wouldn't mind, I just leak over to your noise complaints. Noise complaints are very, very high on the community's level for things they want done. They not only stem from, we see the majority of our noise complaints coming from our multi-dwellings, multi-tenant houses. And unfortunately, they sink down into a C call level, and that is A is your highest priority, B is less than high, but C is almost kind of when you have a free car and you can get to it. You remember that from the old police days.
One of the things that I do, I have a lot of people in my neighborhood come to me in reference to dealing with a noise complaint. I carry a copy of the noise complaint with me sometimes, and I would politely confront the individual. So look, the city...
He's not telling you the whole truth. He carries a copy of the noise ordinance and a 9mm on his waist.
Oh, God.
I still don't know what's under that.
And
Next
you know,
thing we'll be looking for Jerry.
I explained, I introduced myself. A lot of people know me anyway, and I said, in case you do not know, you know, I have a copy here of the city's noise complaint, and we take this very seriously. You know? I'm going to leave a copy with you, but right now the presence of your volume is unacceptable. Can you address this matter? You know, in most cases they will. They will take care of it themselves, but you must make them aware of it. And it's amazing when you show people, when the ordinance is on the table, my case is stable.
Well,
So-
that's what good neighbors are about, realizing if you're inconveniencing your neighbors. Chief, another $1 million question for you. And this goes back and forth all the time. I don't think anybody has a real answer. What would you like to see the strength of the Hartford Police Department at? I know right now we're, what, 440, 450, somewhere around there. You've got a class in the academy now. What do you think it would take to properly police this city?
Well, right now we're approximately 447. We have a class of 23 about to graduate in September, but they're not on their own for a long period of time. What would I like to see the strength of the police department on? And that's a constant question that we're bouncing around. Can I just say, well, a different police has this many people, and that's how many police we should need? Maybe. I should take that into consideration though. Should I understand the strength of our police department? And what I asked for initially, right off the bat, was something called the reorganization structure study, something we can study the workloads of our officers to determine if we're actually applying good law enforcement management to our neighborhoods and to our entire city. So that is out there too. That's the second component. And then we have to blend the two between our fiscal restraints. We really do have to pay attention to that because, you know, we were over for money last year, and we face the same constraints this year also.
But you got an unlimited budget this year, right?
Yeah, right.
The credit card doesn't go far.
Chief, may I make a comment on that topic? A few months ago, I did a study. I pulled the data from data analysis, crime analysis, 30 years of information, and what I was looking for was what was the manpower strength each year? Okay, what was the crime statistic for each year? And after studying it, and with others, what we seem to notice is that the fact that you may have a very large number of men out here doesn't necessarily keep down your crime statistics. So what was the common denominator when some years you had rather low manpower? You certainly weren't up to strength, yet you had a better control on the crime statistics. And the common denominator, we believe, was leadership. Leadership, you get guys who work. You get guys who want to work. You get sergeants and lieutenants have a clear understanding what the mission is, and they make sure their men do what they're supposed to do. And
I think you're going to see that because even as I talk to some of the younger officers out there on the street,
let me finish, Kevin.
they're very excited about the new chief.
Okay, but let me finish. If you look at the pages of history, through armies and things, and you will see the same scenario perpetrates itself. You know, leadership, dedication, and understanding.
Well, let me add this before you take your call, if you wouldn't mind. Policing has changed dramatically over the years, especially in regards to community policing. We now have community service officers, we have school resource officers, we now have these condition units. These are officers that are not specifically taking calls for service. Because when we were around, Jerry, there were X amount of cars and everybody was taking calls for service except your specialized units. Things have changed. It requires more manpower from the officers that wear the blue uniform, that are visible out there. And that's what we're seeing, that there's a saturation down to the community level, which is expensive for us. And you can see that with the community-oriented policing and cops in general that supply us, and most recently the 12 recruits we were able to retain. Those officers are going to be, patrol is always the backbone, but now we're seeing the backbone change just a little to include the vertebrae and everything that goes with it for the community service officers. So,
What I would like to see...
Let's take the call, we got it.
Go ahead.
Trish, is the call still there? Okay, go ahead, caller. Go ahead.
Yes, Kevin, this is a very good program that you was able to eventually
Trish,
get
bring the
police
monitor
chief
up.
on, and I really appreciate what you've been able to do for this particular program.
A little
I
higher.
just kind of want to address to the police chief, what is the most prevalent drugs that's still causing most of the problems on the streets of Hartford? And do you feel that there's more or less of a drug problem today than there were, let's say, 20 years ago in Hartford? Thank you.
Thanks, John.
I think the drug problem was a little bit more than it was 20 years ago, quite a bit more actually. We're seeing just a buffet of drugs out there between marijuana, cocaine, crack. We're seeing the artificial drugs also. But how do we address that? I chose to address it in a different way to begin with. We have the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms out there. We have the FBI. We have the statewide narcotics task force. We have the FBI. We have units that control, DEA, I'm sorry. We have units that control the supply to the city. And that's where I've made the investment, if I control the supply. If I run you down a hypothetical situation here, if I was actually to cut off the entire supply to the city, what would happen? And the answer would be that my crimes of property would just skyrocket and go through the roof. My burglaries, my larcenies, even violence to robberies would go through the roof, because now narcotics are 4 and 5 and 6 times more expensive. But with that said, some of these narcotics problems are more of a social problem. Unfortunately, we've dumped billions and billions of dollars in the United States over a course of those 20 years, trying to stop the flow of drugs. And I'll get to another hypothetical for you in a minute. Some of these are abuse problems. Some of these tend towards anger management problems, school problems, things that should be addressed on different levels rather than just arresting somebody and putting them in jail. And I see that more and more. When I talk about presence, I see that if one of my officers makes an arrest for, let's say, a narcotic user making a purchase, 1 bag, 10 bags, 100 bags, really in the whole scheme of things really does not have any effect on the supply of drugs. That's only a one arrest. The party goes to jail, goes to booking. My officer's tied up for about 2 hours with a report, maybe transport, another half an hour for bagging and tagging and filling out the forms for the toxicology. But what realistically happens is that gentleman who is arrested has been arrested 10, 12, 15, 70 times before. And he won't be getting out of jail because he has a failure to appear, or he's going to be bonded where he can't afford to get out. So in 2 hours, he's going to have withdrawals. My officer is going to have to go back and get him for a one-on-one transport to the hospital. And now I've lost that officer for the entire shift, and maybe into the following shift, which will incur me overtime or the next officer relieving him. That's when I say, boy, if that arrest was never done, that officer would be on the street. He'd have that presence. He'd be able to maybe stymie several other crimes that are more violent in nature or address more community crimes. So that's in a nutshell, and I hope I've answered your question.
Okay. One of the other things is the number of guns you seize. And I know you just don't throw those in a room. You know, somebody tracks them and tries to see if they're been used in other crimes or whatever. Where are most of those guns coming from? Are they coming from out of state? Are they taken in burglaries? Or how do those guns make it to the streets of Hartford?
Well, Jerry said all the above. The majority of our guns come in from mostly burglaries from the suburbs into the city. They're all tracked by ATF, who tries to find the owner. We track the serial number, of course. We also have devoted a Hartford Police Sergeant to the Connecticut State Police Forensic Lab, who will engage in the beginnings of the forensic testing. That was a huge investment on our part, which has just paid dividends. And what he does is he entered it into a NIBIN system, which can look at, ballistically, look at connections to other cases, which we're seeing connections, 10, 12 different cases to one gun. That helps us substantially as we go. But I will say to you that if we send our officers out just to track guns, only get guns, get people with guns, violent crime increases. So the more guns I recover on the street, the more my violent crime goes up. So it's a very difficult ratio to
How
understand.
does that equation happen?
I don't know how it happens.
You think by taking the guns off the street, the violence would, and not that you're going to get every gun, but you'd think you'd see a decrease in the number of shootings and violent crime.
And that's what one would think, but we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that around the country, actually. So what do we say to ourselves? We say, well, how do we really make an effect here? Maybe it's education. Maybe it's telling the shooters, leave your gun at home. If you're going to go do your business and take your chances with the police. But when you bring your gun out or use your gun, now we're coming after you. So,
well, people watching may say, that's craziness. How are the police going to tell people to leave their guns at home if they shouldn't have the guns in the first place? But one of the most recent homicides, and you don't have to give us any details, but what's out there in the public already on Sterling Street is that there was an altercation earlier in the day, and one of the females left and came back with a gun and then shot an innocent victim in front of his 4-year-old daughter as she did a drive-by shooting and sprayed the house with bullets. Now, that's a type of thing that, you'd think people would say, okay, take a breath, calm down. It's not worth spending the rest of your life in prison to settle an argument. But apparently that's not the mindset we see. So how do you address that? And you talk about telling kids, and back, when we were younger, fistfights were the way to settle things. Not that it was right, but we didn't run home and get a gun and go shoot somebody in the back of the head. So how do you bring about that thinking, and how do you reach these kids to tell them that this is the right way to act like adults?
In regards to Sterling Street, I'm sorry, in regards to Sterling Street, you actually had somebody that was just bent on shooting somebody. Motive. She had intent to go out, and we're alleging she had intent to go out and shoot someone.
Shot the wrong person.
Shot the wrong person, but those are very, very difficult for us to interrupt. Similar to a domestic-related stabbing or a shooting or something motivated along those lines. Very difficult for the police to interrupt. So we actually shift to another gear. We shift to education. We try to insert some decision-making to that would-be shooter. Just try to insert some, because if we can give him a momentary pause, maybe he will come up with that moral compass, or maybe he'll come up with the self-preservation compass that says, if I do this, I'll give it some thought about going to jail. The police may get me. So that's self-preservation too.
I got a question for the chief. Chief, we have these officers in our high schools, and for years I've been saying, what are they doing? Are they a part of the solution, or are they just a problem there? Because the point, when I look at it in general, I see them, we're supposed to be in there motivating, educating, encouraging our young people to be better, or to do, become an officer or a firefighter or something. But I don't see that. How are you going to change that kind of thinking? Because the point is that we can't just have them sitting here waiting to arrest these kids. We need a different way. If we're talking about educating young people to be different in how to deal with their problem, they are the answer. But they need to be quick to do
like
that.
Jerry said before, it comes down to leadership.
Well, it's funny, at 11 o'clock earlier today, I sat with all these school resource officers, and we talked about several different concepts and some new school of thinking that is starting to emerge. We have what's called a disproportionate minority contact, and that's something we're working on a memo of understanding with the Board of Education. And what we're doing there is actually turning, the board would like to take, the school would like to take the responsibility for handling incidents inside the school, which doesn't include the police officers. Police officers have discretion for misdemeanor crimes. They have absolute discretion. But when it hits the felony stage, they have very little discretion, if any. They're guided by state statutes, they're guided by our policies and procedures, which tells these officers how to operate and what process to take. So we're essentially saying the school can handle behavioral problems. They can handle minor physical contacts. They can handle what goes on in their school, which makes me think, well, maybe I should have a couple school resource officers and let them travel around to all the different schools. Although I am a little leery about the high schools right now, but I think the middle school and the grammar schools can do very well with officers that travel within those schools.
Gee,
So,
you remember, once upon a time, Kevin, you may not remember this, the high schools had an officer assigned to the school who taught a class. It was called the Protective Services class. You taught the class, you made the students aware of some of the things that they could, upon graduation, go into the fire department, police department.
Well, I think that's part of the understanding that needs to come between the police and the board. What is that officer there for? And it should be a real mentoring process too, to build bridges with these kids.
Believe me, you do build a bridge, because you're in that classroom with these kids every day, and they get to know you, you get to know them. They come speak to you privately after a while. Many of them have doubts about themselves. You really think I can get into this or that? And you take the time, you bring people in to even talk to them. Chief Stewart, who was the chief of the fire department, I brought him into my classroom and he talked to the kids and other people. So
That was a one-room schoolhouse, all right? So,
no, Kevin.
but no, and this has been, it's kind of been a hot button issue now that we talk about not wanting to give young children a record, and the police really shouldn't be the disciplinarian in the school. If it's a behavioral issue or a problem with a loud, boisterous student, that's not something the police should really be dealing with. That's a school issue. Look at what are the societal problems behind it, what's the home life like, and an arrest isn't going to solve that.
No.
So I think that's where there needs to be a better understanding.
But you also need people who have the sensitivity to understand those things.
Well, and I think, I started to allude to this before. I've talked to a lot of younger officers now that are really encouraged over the successes you've had with the shooting task force. And people will rise to the level of accountability you hold them to. If there's no accountability, then you're going to have a free-for-all. If they know that the discipline is going to be fair and even across the board, this is your job, this is what we expect you to do, I've given you a task, I expect it to be accomplished. That's all that people are looking for, to have some leadership there and be fair about the way they're treated. A lot of little things that, to us sitting here as residents may mean nothing, but a lot of people have liked to see the lieutenants and captains back in the blue shirts, which sounds stupid. Why is that an issue? But they like that. They're one of them. They're no longer elite guys in the white shirts that are better than everybody else. Cruisers going to black and white, which is traditional. It's the way most of the nation is going. And that's my understanding is your plan for the next cruisers order are actually going to be the traditional black and white cruisers. Mm-hmm. There's a long line of tradition in the Hartford Police Department. And the respect needs to come back to the level that it used to be. It used to be that everybody wanted to, anybody thinking about going into police work, Hartford's where you wanted to go.
But I have a question for the chief.
Go ahead.
My community CSOs, and I always brag about my CSOs in my neighborhood because
He's
we've
working on
known
it. Don't
each
beat him
other
up.
But beat him up. No, I would like to make sure that all neighborhood of the city of Hartford have good CSOs that they can relate to their residents, so they can feel the same feel I feel about my CSOs and my lieutenants. So if it's something that you can work on to make it happen for all neighborhoods, you will have extra credit.
And that's something that we've talked about that. You've got the benefit of a great relationship. You've got a lieutenant who holds his guys accountable. You've got a couple of hard-working CSOs. And I would venture to say most of the people that are in the South End or that go to your meetings have all three of those guys on speed dial in their phones. But you go to other areas of the city and ask, who's your lieutenant, who's your CSO, and they have no clue.
Right.
But yours didn't happen by chance. It's because you've held them accountable, you've partnered with them and brought them into your meetings where they get to talk to people, hear all the different issues. And the McDonald's robbery is a perfect example. That's, not that I would encourage people to go chasing armed robbers in their, personal vehicles, but he was on his cell phone far enough back, provided valuable information to the police, and that's somebody that lives in your area.
Yeah.
So
I think is that partnership that is so critical to make the department work is so important. And as Kevin said, it comes from the top. Leadership has to instill that in everyone, from the groundwork all the way up, so everyone can feel good.
we got about 3 minutes left, but
Right.
Chief, what's your immediate goals? I know the contract was done. You've gotten, I think, about $1.5 million for police vehicles, which are sorely needed. What's your immediate goal? Where do you want to go with the police department over the next few months?
In the next few months, I'd really like to see some reorganization in the police department, some soul searching within the police department and how we deliver our resources, and we need to deliver them more effectively to the community. And that includes Hyacinth, our CSOs. I want to see if I can expand the CSO programs. I also want to drill down deeper than the NRZs. I want to get back a little to the block watches. I want to start the 2 faith-based groups in the north and the south, and I want to attack certain areas that are troublesome for us to make some effect on it for the.
We're running out of time. Our credits are coming up. Sorry, Trish, on that phone call. Came a little late, but thank you for watching us today. I hope you found this informative. Maybe down the road we can have the chief on again as more things start to progress. But thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.